Hey, Danny is a co-founder and CEO at Fern, Build with Fern. And Danny and I have been chatting a little bit because they are a DocSearch user and they're doing some really interesting things with DocSearch, being a documentation platform themselves. So, Danny, why don't I let you explain what you're doing and what Fern is?
I would love to do that. I'm going to share my screen at the same time. As Chuck mentioned, my name is Danny. I'm one of the co-founders here at Fern, and we build documentation websites for businesses. We've modeled the docs that we've built by best in class, which is Stripe. Everyone expects keyword search, and we use DocSearch to power that. But then nowadays, people expect more than keyword search. They expect an AI chat with docs experience. So again, I'm Danny, based out of Brooklyn, New York. We are an in-person company, and I'm going to talk about what Fern is, a learning that I had from Y Combinator, an accelerator program that we went through, a demo of how our keyword and AI search works, and then some architecture of how we built the AI search. All right. About Fern, we provide SDKs and docs for a company's API. What does that mean? Typically, folks will add an open API spec as input, and then we will generate a documentation website and SDKs, whether it's Python, TypeScript, or another language that a customer may need. We came out of the Y Combinator program, and in talking to Chuck ahead of the session, there was something that really stuck on my mind, which is that there was this expression at the Y Combinator accelerator program, "so it turns out." And as an entrepreneur, one of my goals is to figure out what to build. And so at Fern, we learned that so it turns out most companies don't want to build their documentation websites in-house, but they do it because they want really high quality. Algolia is a good example. Today, the Algolia docs are built in-house and managed by a documentation team that has to do both technical writing and the software development behind those docs. When thinking about documentation, we're a big fan of use the best tool for the job. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and actually go into a demo. And so I'm showing right here the 11 Labs API documentation website. So 11 Labs is a voice AI company. And at Fern, we power their documentation. So I'll scroll to the bottom here, and you can see that this is built with Fern. We both build and host the documentation. Our customers, I'm going to start with the product overview, and then I'll go into how we implemented DocSearch to power an AI chat experience. Customers have guides or pages content. So I'll go to this quick start, for example. This is written by the team at 11 Labs. And if I scroll to the bottom, I can see a couple of niceties. I can see that they're using some components. I can see that there's this concept of rating a page as helpful or unhelpful. And then I can also see that there's this edit this page button. And this brings me to Markdown content, or MDX, that behind the scenes is powering this documentation website. So Fern is not a content management system. Instead, we read from GitHub and we build and host a documentation website. And to see some of the components that we were looking at, all a user has to do is write something like a note. And then on page, Fern takes care of displaying that in a beautiful way. This avoids a company from having to build their own documentation platform in-house. We spend a lot of our time at Fern thinking about the API reference experience. It's where we shine. And in the API reference, again, I mentioned that there's this company out there called Stripe that truly is the gold standard for documentation today. And if I go to one of these endpoints, I can see that on the left-hand side, I've got navigation. In the middle, I can see the parameters like path and query parameters, as well as request and response details. And then on the right side, I'm seeing example code of how to make a request. And I can do this in multiple programming languages. So if I'm a Python developer, I can select Python once, and then it's remembered across the rest of the documentation. I can even try it and actually make a request from within the documentation which is very much like a postman-like experience. And in this case, I want to record myself in audio, and then I want to go ahead and upload this. And if I send request, I don't have a valid API key in now, but this would send an authenticated request. All right, so that gives you a pretty good overview of what the Fern Docs product is. Now I'm going to focus on our implementation of Algolia. In the search, we use Algolia. If I want to say what models are available, we use Algolia DocSearch to power these keyword-based responses. But we got a lot of feedback. And the feedback that we got is, I want AI chat on top of keyword search. I don't just want keyword search. And so if I ask what models are available, again, this is a company that provides an API that is a voice AI model under the hood. What this is doing is it's generating me a response in real time. I think that we're all pretty familiar with this ChatGPT or Claude-like experience. But what's unique here is that it's an assistant that's trained on your documentation content, similar to how Algolia is wired up for keyword search automatically. What I'd like to do is talk about how we built this at Fern. And to do that, I'm going to head and switch screens and show you some architecture of what we did. This is the really fun part for me. All right. Under the hood, I mentioned that there are markdown files. So I will go ahead and make my screen a bit bigger, and then I'll zoom in. So what we do is we take as input a markdown file, in this case, MDX, and we feed it into what we call the chunker. And we turn each piece, we focus on the headings, and we took this algorithm very inspired by DocSearch, but we take each heading and we chunk it into different portions of the page. Out of that chunker comes a JSON object, and that JSON object, this is an example of one page being split into 4 different chunks. We then take those chunks and we send them to Algolia DocSearch, which helps power our keyword search. At the same time, we needed to add a new portion of this architecture so that we could have this semantic search or this natural language search. And so we first asked Algolia, hey, Algolia, and I actually called up Chuck and said, hey, Chuck, do you have a semantic search we can use out of the box? And while Algolia is working on that right now, it's specific for the e-commerce use case. And as a documentation website provider, it didn't work for us. So we had to build this ourselves. But we're an engineering company, and so it's exciting to get the opportunity to build. These 4 chunks are fed into a vectorizer, and that vectorizer turns really what a string into a long series of numbers. That long series of numbers is called a vector, and they represent the semantic meaning of that chunk. That is stored in a tool. This is a third-party company called Turbo Puffer that we use as our vector database. So we go ahead and take a markdown file, run it through the chunker, take those different chunks, feed it to Algolia DocSearch, and at the same time, we vectorize it, actually using a tool from LangChain. We feed it to Turbo Puffer, and then we use the OpenAI text embedding 3 large model to actually help us with that vectorization. So I'll explain one more time. We have chunks. Chunks, actually, we're using that LangChain tool to help us chunk. It then goes into a vectorizer. That vectorizer feeds it to an OpenAI model called the embedding 3 large model. And then we then store those records in Turbo Puffer. Happy to answer any questions about this afterwards as well. Well, that's great. Now at build time, we have Algolia DocSearch and Turbo Puffer ready to go. What happens next is that a user would ask a question. And this is when they would go to the documentation website of any of our hundreds of customers. They would go type in the search bar something like, how do I get started with this company, your company's documentation? In this case, my example is, how do I get started with Fern? When they do enter that query and hit return, we have an API endpoint that we call the chat endpoint, which is a post endpoint. It's RESTful. And that post endpoint immediately makes 2 API calls. Those calls, one of them goes to Algolia, and we say, hello, Algolia, please give me the 20 records that are highest probability to be relevant to this user search. At the same time, we use this semantic search, which is the pipeline that we saw built previously, and this hits the tool that we use called TurboPuffer. Another popular vector database is Pinecone. And we ask, can you find me the top K results? And this is the K nearest neighbors algorithm. So we say, try to assess the semantic meaning of this question, and then give us the 20 chunks or records that are stored as vectors. Return me the 20 vectors that are the closest in proximity. At that point, we now have 40 records, 20 that came from Algolia and 20 that came from our semantic search. We then leverage our next tool. I mentioned that we use the best tool for the job. In this case, the best re-ranker is an algorithm that's provided by Cohere. So we actually make a call out to Cohere, and we say, hello, Cohere, we've got 40 chunks. Can you help us figure out which are the 10 that are most relevant to this user's query? Cohere then helps us re-rank, and then now we have 10 chunks. Those are strings. We feed those into the context window. In this case, we're actually feeding it through AWS Bedrock to Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Haiku model. And Claude returns us a chat completion, which is a server-sent event that is streaming content to the UI. We then use a tool from between streaming content to the UI and showing up. We use the Vercel AI SDK, which helps create this beautiful loading that we're probably familiar with from ChatGPT, how some words load kind of continuously, it's loading. It doesn't wait until the end. So the Vercel AI SDK helps us create that visual effect. And then we return with an answer to the end user. This is how we at Fern have been able to use Algolia to create both keyword search and semantic search as options for our customers. What we were able to do is enable an AI chat experience that can come out of the box. I believe Julie will be able to share a link to the Figma file in case. I know I was moving around a lot and it might be hard to see, but feel free to check it out on your own. That is how at Fern we have used DocSearch to create an AI search experience. With that, I would love to take any questions from the audience.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I bet there's some folks that are actually making a shopping list based on some of those tools that you were recommending in that whole pile there. I think when you were doing the dry run, I was like, oh, I got to go check out that Vercel AI SDK. That's for sure. That's the one that really stuck out to me. You do have some questions here, Danny, so I'll get to them. From Frederico. Frederico would like to know, do you limit the size of the items/docs text that you send to the Algolia index, or do you index the whole document?
We index the whole document, but we chunk it up in just small pieces. But we index 100% of it.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and this is coming from actually someone on the Algolia Docs team, for full transparency. Gary wants to know, would you consider a full DocSearch solution when Algolia gets there?
Great question. One piece of feedback that we've heard from our customers is they actually want to control the system prompt. So we've written a system prompt and our customers want access to it and they want to change it. It's easy for us to do that because we built the whole pipeline.
Right.
The second thing they asked for, Cohere is actually a customer of ours, and they don't want us using an Anthropic model. They're using Cohere. They just released Command A, which is their newest large language model. And then we talked to another team who actually has a re-ranking algorithm, and they want to use their own re-ranking algorithm. And so one of the learnings for me, Chuck, is that the more customizable and plug and play you can make it, the happier developers are as customers. I think we're going to see a lot of fun happen when developers can actually go edit that system prompt and control what happens when users are interacting with AI chat.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think it would be hard for us to use an Algolia provided solution, but I would love to see it.
We are huge fans of composable architectures. That's why we are an API first company ourselves. So fully embrace that sort of being able to take the Lego bricks, right, and assemble them the way that best suits your individual use case. I would agree. There's sort of interesting things around setting the tone of maybe how your documentation is going to convey information, the confidence that you have in sort of certain things. I can see there sort of being some need to sort of do some tweaking there. That being said, Gary, I think it's definitely something that we want to consider doing on our own as well. It's always nice to be able to sort of have that capability in your back pocket.
It's also nice, Chuck, to not have another data processor. Like if I got to get rid of a lot of the external API calls that I mentioned, and we got to only call Algolia, given that we're already using them, they're in our stack, they're in our privacy policy, that would make things easier from my end from a business perspective.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Well, all of my questions I think I got to have answered during the dry run. But it was really great to see sort of the stack that you've built, to see sort of taking DocSearch and sort of that UI and that very familiar way of kind of doing documentation and being able to sort of add on to it and extend it.
Chuck, it's also fun to see in the Figma file that was shared. It looks like there are a couple dozen people right now moving around and exploring it. It's very fun to see the live Figma reaction. So I want to say thank you to the whole Algolia team, Chuck, Tim, Julie, for giving me the opportunity to come and both be a customer and now, more closely a partner.
Thanks. And can you hang out and chat for a little bit if people have additional questions, Danny?
I'll be here.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Very much appreciate your presentation.